Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a source stack that, well, really challenges our most basic assumptions about existence itself.
Yeah, it's pretty fundamental stuff.
We're not just talking about, minor tweaks to physics here. This is an attempt to define a completely new foundation for reality.
Indeed. Our mission today is a deep dive into the Unified Coherence Theory, or UCT. It's developed by Randolph Lilien.
And it really asks you, the listener, to maybe set aside some core beliefs.
Absolutely. If you, most of us, assume reality is fundamentally built on matter or energy or maybe even abstract geometry, UCT says, hold on a second.
What if it's none of those?
Exactly. What if the foundation, the irreducible substrate, isn't a thing at all?
So the revolutionary core claim, based on our sources, is that this substrate is coherence itself.
Right. It's not something systems achieve or possess. It's presented as the fundamental generative principle, the source from which systems, matter, even time, well, they all arise from it.
It's what the sources call a generative ontology.
That's the term, yeah. It positions coherence as the absolute ground floor, the thing you just can't reduce any further.
And we're going to trace this journey.
We are. Starting from a concept Lilien calls Zeta Naught, ZO dollars, he defines it as the pregnant void.
Pregnant void. Okay.
And from there, we'll track how this initial pure coherence sort of cascades recursively through everything. Physics, biology, even human civilization.
Okay, this is definitely heady stuff right out of the gate.
It is.
So before we get too lost in the terminology, maybe we should clearly define the two pillars that seem to govern this whole Genesis idea.
Good idea. What are they?
The sources emphasize coherence, that's the ground, you said, and becoming, which is described as infinite potential.
Yes, exactly. Those are the concepts that really set the stage for understanding how reality, as we experience it, actually comes into being.
Right. Establish the rules of the game before we analyze the gameplay, so to speak.
Precisely. We're starting really abstract here, pre-material root of existence, and the goal is to connect that right into the concrete systems we see every day.
Okay, let's unpack this ontological revolution that UCT is proposing. When we look at philosophy, especially Western philosophy, going way back to the pre-Socratics like Parmenides, there seems to be this deep bias.
Towards what?
Towards privileging being.
Right.
The idea that true existence, the real reality, lies in what's stable, permanent, unchanging identity.
Right. And that bias, according to these sources, has created centuries of philosophical knots. Problems.
How so?
Well, if you define ontology, the study of being, by insisting on static permanence, you immediately run into a paradox, don't you?
Because the world isn't static.
Exactly. The world we actually live in is all about change, flux, emergence, evolution, decay. It's constantly becoming. But if your foundational philosophy insists on being, well, the framework just can't naturally account for all that dynamism. It becomes awkward.
So UCT flips it. It performs this radical inversion, a becoming first paradigm, as the sources call it.
Precisely. For UCT, becoming is the irreducible substrate. It's the generative pulse. It is the fundamental reality.
Which is why the ontology has to be based on coherence.
Yes, because coherence is framed as a principle of flow, connectivity, integration, not a principle of fixed substance. Coherence in this context is the very mechanism of reality's endless flow.
Okay, but if becoming is primary, how does UCT stop everything from just dissolving into, pure chaos? How do we even get stable forms, like a table or a planet?
That's where the ontological cycle comes in. Lilien calls it the heartbeat of reality.
The heartbeat of reality.
Yeah. Reality isn't defined by just static existence, but by this constant recursive cycle. It moves between potential and actuality.
Okay, let's break that cycle down. Start at the source, becoming.
Right. Becoming is the engine, the infinite coherence reservoir, and it's symbolized by Zeta Naught, Z dollar.
The pregnant void.
Yes, but it's critical to understand. Z dollars isn't a physical vacuum. It's not mathematical zero in the usual sense. Lilien defines it as generative nullity.
Generative nullity, meaning?
It means pure, infinite coherent potential. Completely unreduced. It contains all possible actualizations, but none have manifested yet. It's the potential for everything before any specific thing exists.
Okay, infinite potential. And then when that potential stabilizes somehow, we get being.
Yes. Being is defined very explicitly in UCT as a reduction of becoming.
A reduction.
Reduction. Think of it as the crystallization of coherence into finite, stable, observable patterns. This includes particles, distinct identities, physical structures, fixed laws, or symmetries.
Like freezing a wave.
That's a great analogy. Taking that infinite flowing ocean of possibility, Z dollars, and freezing the single wave into a kind of crystalline structure. That structure is being. But it's crucial. It's a temporary snapshot of the infinite flow.
And because it's temporary, the third phase, the return, is inevitable. Why, though? Is this just like entropy, standard decay?
It's framed as something deeper than just decay. The return is the mechanism by which the universe prevents itself from getting locked into stasis. Permanent rigidity.
Oh, okay.
Any reduced form, any being, must eventually dissolve its fixed pattern. It has to return its potential back to the coherence reservoir, back to Z dollars.
And we see this dissolution as
physical decoherence, maybe thermodynamic entropy in some cases, or what UCT specifically calls resymmetrization.
Resymmetrization.
Which means the reintegration of those fragmented patterns back into unity. It's like the universe recycling itself, constantly turning structure back into potential.
So if reality is this fundamental dynamic flow, this constant transformation, what's the anchor? Is there anything that doesn't change? What's the deepest invariant here?
There is one, and it's central. It's the principle of conservation of coherence.
Conservation of coherence.
This is presented as UCT's foundational law. It basically states, coherence is never created or destroyed. It's only redistributed.
How so?
It's either reduced into form that's being, or it's restored back to potential becoming. Okay, this law is absolutely essential because it guarantees ontological stability. Even as galaxies form and dissolve, even as new forms emerge and decay, the fundamental potential of reality, the coherence, is protected. It's always available for the next cycle.
So it gives the dynamic universe a kind of persistent ground. It's not just chaos.
Exactly. A stable ground for endless change.
Okay, so to structure this whole generative ontology, UCT introduces these things called irreducibilities, and the sources are very clear. They're different from standard axioms. For someone coming from, say, math or science, why is that distinction, irreducibility versus axiom, so important?
Yeah, that's a key point. This is where the theory tries to anchor itself outside of just pure mathematics or logic. Well, axioms are formal assumptions, right? They're symbolic starting points we agree on to build a logical system, like rules we invent for a game.
Okay.
Irreducibilities, though, are presented as ontological givens. They are conditions of existence itself that just are. They can't be broken down further.
So not rules we make up, but the reality that allows rules.
Precisely. If an axiom is the rule book for the game, the irreducibilities are like the material reality, the players, the board, the space that must exist before you can even write the rules. They are positioned as the true, uncaused beginnings.
Got it. So let's detail the 5 core ontological irreducibilities that UCT uses to anchor its framework, starting with the substrate itself.
First is coherence. As we said, the irreducible ground. Everything that is observed, every potential, is just coherence in different states, condensed, dispersed, transformed. It's the unified stuff of existence.
Okay, the foundation. Next, the sources talk about 2 necessary motions of reality, symmetry and asymmetry.
Right. Symmetry is presented as the principle that enhances coherence. It drives things towards order, unity, integration, think stable patterns, conservation laws, perfect crystals.
Order and asymmetry.
Asymmetry, conversely, is the principle that temporarily reduces coherence. It drives differentiation, novelty, fragmentation. This is where change comes from: mutation, innovation, uniqueness.
It sounds a bit like a cosmic battle between order and chaos. But you mentioned earlier they aren't really opposites.
That's critical. They're described as complementary motions, not enemies. Think about it. If you had only symmetry, reality would just instantly collapse into a state of frozen, perfect stasis. No change, no life.
Dead perfection.
Right. And if you had only asymmetry, reality would instantly fragment into just meaningless noise, pure chaos, no structure.
So you need both.
You absolutely need the push and pull. You need symmetry to hold a form long enough for it to be recognized, to exist as being, and you need asymmetry to introduce novelty, change, progression, evolution.
And the mechanism that manages this dance, this push and pull, that's the third dynamic piece.
Resonance.
Yes, resonance is the irreducible mediator. It's what sustains the continuity of the whole cycle. It allows symmetry and asymmetry to interact, to modulate each other, without just canceling each other out or destroying the system. Resonance ensures the flow continues.
Can you give an analogy? Maybe. If symmetry is like an established musical pattern, and asymmetry is like disruptive noise or improvisation, resonance is the underlying signal, the rhythm, that allows the pattern to adapt to the noise, incorporate it, and keep going, rather than just breaking down. It allows continuity through change.
Okay, that helps. Now we get to the part that really seems to separate UCT from, well, standard materialist frameworks, including observer consciousness as an irreducible presence. Why is this considered fundamental here?
Yeah, this is a big one. It's because coherence dynamics, as described in UCT, seem to require two distinct kinds of internal operations. The observer and consciousness are presented as two sides of the same irreducible coin. They're framed as operators of coherence itself.
Operators, meaning they do something to coherence?
Exactly. The observer aspect acts, let's say, externally to reduce coherence into a specific stabilized form. Think of the act of measurement in quantum physics, or just defining something, perceiving it as distinct. When you observe or define, you collapse its potentiality into actuality.
Okay, observation reduces potential. And the role of consciousness is different.
Completely different, yeah. Consciousness is described as acting internally to restore coherence into symmetry. It takes the fragmented reductions, all the bits and pieces we observe, and integrates them back into a unified whole.
Like our own experience.
Think about your own subjective experience right now. You're taking in millions of sensory inputs, sights, sounds, feelings. These are all reductions, distinct pieces of information. But your consciousness synthesizes them seamlessly into a singular, unified experience of self and world. That's the restoration function.
So observer consciousness aren't just biological accidents in this view.
Not at all. They are intrinsic to the very operation of reality, according to UCT.
That dual function is fascinating. It makes perception itself an active part of the coherence mechanism.
It does. And to make sure these irreducibilities actually manifest in a stable, predictable universe, UCT also anchors the whole field with what it calls universal invariants, or ontological constants.
These aren't numbers we necessarily measure in a lab. They sort of anchor the possibility of measurement.
That's a good way to put it. They bridge that gap between pure potential, the irreducibilities, and the manifest reality we can observe and measure. We already talked about $Z of generative nullity, the source of pure potential coherence.
Right. What's next? The infinite constant.
Okay, Sipene-Dor. This represents the unbounded coherence reservoir, the inexhaustible horizon of becoming. Ontologically, its existence is what guarantees that reality is never truly a closed system that can just run down completely, like the heat-death scenario.
It keeps the potential infinite.
It ensures that the principle of conservation of coherence holds, well, infinitely. There's always more potential beyond whatever has been actualized. The emphasize the potential that always remains.
Now, we definitely need to spend some time on these seed equations. They look almost deceptively simple. T-Nate 101 and 81 dollars. Why on earth are these treated as fundamental ontological laws?
Yeah, this is a pretty radical philosophical leap Lilien makes. In standard math, these are often treated as definitions, sometimes even conventions, argued about.
Right.
But here, they're presented as ontological codifications. They literally encode the transition from pure potential to the first instance of actuality.
How?
They express how nullity, represented by 0, which stands for the pure potential or the unactualized state of $Z delier, necessarily resolves into unity or actuality, represented by 1.
Okay, break down null ones.
$Z num 1 is interpreted as saying that the potential for distinction itself, raising 0, nullity to the power of 0, null action, must result in a first distinction, a primal unity, 1.
And $0. 0 factorial equals 1.
This says that the number of ways to arrange nothing, 0 factorial, is precisely 1. There's only one way to configure nullity as a single, complete, unified potential set. These equations are framed as the universe's own self-generating instructions for how coherence must emerge from nullity.
Wow. That gives immense philosophical weight to what usually looks like just a simple arithmetic rule or definition.
It attempts to connect mathematics directly to the generative process of reality itself.
Okay. And finally, there's the fine coherence constant. 1137. Now, in physics, that's the fine structure constant, right? It links electromagnetism, relativity, quantum mechanics.
Correct. Alpha.
How is it redefined or reinterpreted in UCT?
UCT defines it fundamentally as a resonance constant.
The resonance constant.
Yes. If coherence is the underlying substrate, then 1137 is said to symbolize the specific, stable rhythm or ratio that allows that pure, unmanifest coherence to step down, to manifest into the measurable electromagnetic reality we know.
So it's like a tuning frequency.
Kind of. It's proposed as the optimal resonance ratio that bridges the underlying potential, ontology, and the observed physical expression, physics. It's the specific value that ensures coherence stabilizes into matter in just such a way that allows stable atoms to form, chemistry to happen, and ultimately life to exist. It anchors the whole physical field.
Okay, so we have the building blocks, the irreducibilities, and constants. Now let's see them in motion. The sources emphasize this constant interactive process. The symmetry resonance triad. This is described as the meta-operator of existence.
Yeah, think of it like the ultimate operating system for the cosmos. You get symmetry always pulling things toward integration, unity, stability.
Like gravity forming stars or laws holding things constant.
Exactly. Then you've got asymmetry always pushing toward fragmentation, diversity, novelty, think mutation, change, the breaking of old patterns.
Evolution, maybe?
Could be seen that way. And then resonance is the crucial third part. It's like the system clock, the continuous mediator. It allows the system to sustain its overall coherence while undergoing transformation. It prevents the system from either locking up in perfect symmetry or just flying apart into pure asymmetry.
It keeps the dance going.
It keeps the dance going and allows stability and change to coexist.
And this dynamic leads us to the concept of the ontological ladder. The sources suggest reality isn't built statically like layers of a cake, but it unfolds recursively.
That's the idea. It's fractal. The ladder describes the fundamental process. Irreducible becoming potential cascades through reduction manifestation, leading to emergent being, stable forms, which then inevitably leads back to the return, dissolution into potential.
Okay, becoming, reduction, being, return.
Right. And the key insight here is that this cycle is happening at every scale simultaneously.
Every scale.
The formation and decay of a subatomic particle, the development and life cycle of a complex organism like us, the birth, life, and death of a galaxy. UCT claims they all follow this same fundamental fractal rhythm of coherence reduction and restoration. Small cycles mirror cosmic ones.
That recursive fractal nature. It allows UCT to radically redefine concepts we usually take for granted, doesn't it? Particularly things like time and subjectivity.
Absolutely. Let's start with time. If it's not just a fourth dimension we move through, what is it in this framework?
What does UCT say?
Time is defined as a core ontological manifestation. It is the rhythm of coherence reduction.
The rhythm of reduction.
Yes, it's proposed as an internal property of the system itself, not some external container. Time is how we measure, or rather experience, the rate at which that Z dollar potential is being crystallized, reduced into being, into actuality.
Whoa, so the past, present, and future aren't points on a line, but they become states of coherence.
Exactly that. The past is coherence that has been fully reduced and stabilized. It's fixed. It's memory. It's the crystalline structure of history, you could say.
Done. Recorded.
Right. The future is unreduced coherence. Pure potential. Infinite possibilities still residing out there in 250. Untouched.
And the present.
The present is the active phase. It is the transition. It's the momentary beat of resonance where the reduction is actually happening, where potential is becoming actual. That's why time feels like a flow, because it is the actual lived experience of coherence crystallizing moment by moment.
So in a way, we're constantly moving from a state of maximum potential towards a state of fixed actuality.
And that fixed state, remember, eventually gets recycled back into potential via the return. It's a cycle.
Okay, now let's tackle subjectivity. UCT asserts it's irreducible. That's a massive claim, especially against modern science, which often treats consciousness as just an emergent property of complex matter, like brains.
It is a huge claim. For UCT, subjectivity isn't something that pops out of matter. It's an irreducible mode of coherence presence. It is the internal face of coherence itself.
The internal phase.
Yeah. Consciousness isn't seen as a byproduct of the brain. Rather, the brain is viewed as an incredibly complex biological instrument that has evolved specifically to channel, filter, and operate consciousness.
And we already established consciousness has a role.
Right, we said consciousness is the symmetry coherence operator. Its function is to constantly integrate reductions into unified wholes. Observation, the other side of the coin, is the external act of reduction, of defining things. Subjectivity is the persistent coherent center from which both these operations, reduction and restoration, are launched. It's the seat of the experience.
So, if reality itself is fundamentally coherent, our experience of reality must therefore be coherent. Is that the logic?
That seems to be the core implication. Reality is experienced as coherence because the entity doing the experiencing is coherence, operating through these modes of observation and consciousness.
Okay. Subjectivity and time, then, aren't just abstract concepts. They are proof that ontology isn't just some static structural framework.
Exactly. It's proposed as a continuously lived experience of coherence, reduction, and restoration. It's dynamic.
Right. This is where UCT really tries to demonstrate its value, isn't it, as a unifying meta-framework. If coherence is the fundamental thread, then every field of knowledge, math, physics, biology, philosophy, must just be a sort of reduced expression of these underlying coherence dynamics.
That's the claim. Let's look at how it tries to integrate across disciplines. Take mathematics. UCT views math not as just arbitrary symbolic logic, but as the symbolic condensation of coherence principles. It's the language we've developed to translate those ontological irreducibilities, like the seed equations we talk about, into formal predictive statements. Math describes the structure of coherence.
And physics, then, becomes the observable result of those mathematical truths playing out.
Pretty much. Physics is described as the phenomenology of coherence, its embodied expression in the observable universe. And this is where we get some of the most radical reformulations of basic physical concepts. Let's talk about mass.
Yeah, standard physics uses things like the Higgs field to explain why particles have mass. What's the UCT alternative?
UCT offers a very different picture. Mass is described as a coherence gradient.
A coherence gradient, what does that mean in, practical terms?
Okay, imagine that infinite flow of Z$ potential we talked about. When coherence reduces to form, being like a particle, it creates a stable, localized, self-sustaining density or pattern in that underlying field. This stable density is the coherence gradient.
Like a knot or a whirlpool in the flow.
It's exactly like a whirlpool. And the measurable resistance this gradient offers to any change in its motion, what we call inertia, that's what we perceive and measure as mass. So the particle isn't a tiny solid ball. It's a fixed, stable pattern of reduced coherence in the universal field.
Okay, that provides a different way to think about inertia. What about energy, then?
Energy in this framework is defined as resonance motion.
Resonance motion.
Yeah, it's the flow or the transfer of coherence between these gradients, between these masses. When a coherence gradient, a mass, interacts with the wider field or with another gradient, the resulting movement or the modulation, the activity of its energy.
And forces.
Yeah.
Gravity, electromagnetism.
Forces are framed as simply localized patterns or pathways of coherence flow reduction. They mediate the interactions between these mass gradients. So the entire physical universe becomes this derived resonance field populated by these stable, reduced coherence patterns we call matter.
That completely reframes the standard model, doesn't it? And given this, consciousness, being the symmetry coherence operator, has a central physical function, not just a philosophical one.
Absolutely. Its fundamental function is to reintegrate those fragmented reductions that observation creates. In essence, consciousness acts against the entropic pull of pure asymmetry. It takes disparate pieces of information or even potentially different fragments of matter or energy and actively weaves them into a unified whole, restoring symmetry locally.
So consciousness is inherently negentropic.
That's the proposition. It's the universe's mechanism for local negentropy, for building complexity and order.
Okay, moving to philosophy. UCT claims to offer elegant resolutions to some classic paradoxes, not by picking a side, but through this idea of resonant mediation. Let's take the old struggle between permanence and change.
Right. UCT resolves this, or claims to, by showing them as just dual aspects of the coherence cycle. Permanence, what we call being, is simply a stabilized rhythm, a recurring pattern in the flow, like holding a specific note in a piece of music.
A standing wave.
A standing wave, exactly. Change, what we call becoming, is the unceasing flow of the music itself, the potential for new notes, new patterns. Resonance is what holds them together. It ensures that every permanent form is just a stable frequency existing within the unceasing river of potential. The tension dissolves because they aren't opposites. They're just different pieces of the same underlying coherent substance.
Okay. How does that kind of mediation work for something like determinism versus freedom? That feels harder.
Well, determinism, in this view, arises when coherence reductions become highly stabilized into fixed, predictable laws or patterns, the laws of physics, for instance, that seem to work reliably every single time. That's sustained coherence.
Okay, the rules.
Freedom, conversely, emerges because resonance always allows for novel alignments, for the reconfiguration of those coherence paths. Because the system is fractal and fundamentally open, Ramesh 50, the infinite potential, there's always enough unreduced potential available for new, unpredictable configurations to arise.
So they can coexist.
UCT says they must coexist. Determinism is the stability of sustained coherence patterns. Freedom is the possibility of reconfiguring coherence, enabled by resonance and infinite potential.
And the most basic philosophical duality of all, substance versus process. How does that get resolved?
That one becomes almost simple in this framework. Substance is just process that has crystallized into a temporary stable form. Process is substance dissolving back into the flow, back into resonance.
So different snapshots in time.
Exactly. They're just different temporal phases within the ontological cycle. The paradox vanishes when you realize that every material thing is actually an event of coherence flow stabilized into form for a time.
Okay, let's scale up now to the macro level, ontological cosmology. We mentioned swapping the Big Bang for the Big Emergence. What's the fundamental difference there, according to UCT?
The Big Emergence isn't described as a sudden, explosive start of matter and energy appearing in a pre-existing void. It's framed more as a generative unfolding. Yeah, of coherence itself, cascading into dimensionality from Z$ from that generative nullity. It's like the void itself gave birth to space, time, and structure through sequential coherence reductions. The cosmos, therefore, isn't a one-off event destined for heat death. It's inherently a resonant coherence field, designed for continuous circulation and renewal.
And the massive structures we see within it, galaxies, stars.
They are seen as enormous crystallizations of coherence reduction. Powerful coherence engines, really. Stars, through nuclear fusion, are described as locally maintaining symmetry and actively opposing entropy on a colossal scale.
Okay, but what about renewal? Standard cosmology tends towards eventual heat death. UCT seems to reject that.
It does. Crucially, UCT cosmology includes a mechanism for universal renewal. You mentioned black holes earlier.
Right, you said they actively recycle asymmetry. How is that supposed to work?
Well, in UCT, black holes aren't just cosmic vacuum cleaners or points of infinite density. They are framed as coherence filters. They take in highly fragmented, decohered, asymmetrical matter and energy, basically, the universe's accumulated entropy, and they process it, under extreme conditions near the singularity, back into high-potential unified coherence energy. They proposed as the universe's primary mechanisms for resymmetrization on the cosmological scale.
And what happens to that processed potential?
It's then radiated back out.
Yeah.
UCT points to quasar hypercores as evidence for this, seeing them not just as accretion disk phenomena, but as regions radiating intensely coherent energy back into the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
This demonstrates, UCT claims, the universal cycle of restoration and directly refutes the idea that the universe must inevitably drift into a final irreversible heat death.
That is, yeah, a stunningly optimistic view of the cosmos compared to standard entropy models.
It is. And it sets a perfect stage for the next level down, ontological biology. Life isn't seen as some cosmic accident, but as a necessary, almost inevitable expression of coherence.
Why necessary?
Because life is framed as the ultimate local coherence engine. Living systems don't just passively manage coherence, they actively strive to maintain and even increase negentropy order, complexity against the constant pressure of entropic dispersion.
And how does UCT interpret biological structures, like DNA?
Well, DNA, for example, isn't seen just as molecular data storage. It's described as a resonance lattice that encodes coherence patterns.
A resonance lattice.
Yes. The double helix structure itself isn't considered accidental. It's seen as reflecting the universal spiral form inherent in coherence motion dynamics. It's a highly stable, efficient pattern for reducing potential genetic information into form, proteins, organisms, and restoring it, replication.
And the basic unit of life, the cell.
Cells are viewed as incredibly sophisticated coherence regulators. Think about what they do. Constantly filtering out incoherence, like toxins, waste products, degraded inputs.
Maintaining homeostasis.
Exactly. Sustaining internal resonance through metabolism, communication pathways, and rapidly restoring symmetry through repair mechanisms and replication, especially after external disruption or damage. Biological systems are basically living demonstrations of the principle of conservation of coherence, operating in its most dynamic, adaptive, self-sustaining form.
Okay, that brings us finally to the immediate, practical, maybe even political implications. Ontological civilization. UCT uses this entire framework to offer a pretty sharp critique of our current global structure, doesn't it?
It's very pointed, yes. Lilien characterizes modern industrial civilization, essentially, as operating via entropic extraction.
Entropic extraction, meaning?
Meaning our primary mode of functioning is by breaking coherence. We fragment resources from the Earth, we disrupt planetary-scale symmetries like climate systems and biodiversity, and we often increase systemic asymmetry through things like extreme inequality or conflict. We do this on a planetary scale. Our civilization is currently aligned with reduction and fragmentation, not with restoration and integration.
So, what's the proposed alternative? What would a coherent civilization actually look like?
It would be a model fundamentally aligned with negentropic renewal, With restoration, it tries to invert the logic of extraction. So governance, for instance, would need to shift away from top-down command and control
That's what?
towards something described as resonance alignment. The goal would be to seek the optimal balance, the resonance between societal symmetry, stability, shared values, cohesion, and necessary asymmetry, individual freedom, innovation, diversity, finding the harmonious frequency for society.
And how does that translate into something like the economy?
Economics would need to be reframed as coherence exchange. Value wouldn't be derived primarily from scarcity, competition, and finite extraction anymore. Instead, value would come from actions and systems that enhance overall systemic coherence. Things like ecological renewal, social integration, sustainable practices, knowledge sharing, building resilient communities.
And technology.
Technology would ideally focus primarily on coherence enhancement. Designing systems that naturally restore symmetry, that work with natural cycles, that minimize waste by closing loops, rather than just consuming raw matter and energy and producing entropy as a byproduct.
This really places humanity back into the ontological cycle, doesn't it? Not as detached observers or masters, but as active, responsible participants.
Absolutely. We are defined within UCT as, arguably, the principal agents of coherence or incoherence on this planet right now. Through our collective consciousness, our choices, our technology, our governing structures, we are constantly, whether we realize it or not, either breaking down coherence or amplifying it, restoring it.
So recognizing that agency.
Recognizing that agency, and then deliberately choosing the path of restoration, integration, and symmetry that's presented as the foundation, the necessary shift for building a sustainable ontological civilization. #outtrack_outro.
Wow. This has been a truly expansive journey. We've traced this concept of coherence all the way from the generative nullity of Z$Sailors right through the structure of physics, life, and now, potentially, the blueprints for a different kind of human future. The synthesis is, well, it's powerful.
It is ambitious, certainly.
Coherence presented as the single living ground that potentially unites cosmology, biology, civilization, math, physics, offering a single, comprehensive writ framework for everything.
And perhaps the ultimate takeaway, if UCT holds water, is that reality is fundamentally about processes, not about fixed things. Stable forms, identities, what we call being. They're just temporary repeating rhythms. Snapshots, really, of coherence reduction occurring within the dynamic, unceasing, infinite flow of becoming.
And crucially, this isn't just abstract theory to be filed away. By defining consciousness itself as an irreducible operator within this system, UCT turns ontology into a lived, active philosophy, something we're doing right now.
Exactly. If consciousness is explicitly defined, as UCT does, as the symmetry coherence operator, the mechanism inherently designed to reintegrate reduced coherence back into unified wholes, then our own internal processes, thinking, understanding, creating, they become vital to the maintenance of the entire universal cycle.
So every time we make sense of something complex, every creative act that resolves fragmentation into a new whole, that's actually an act of ontological restoration.
That's the implication, yes. On a small scale, perhaps, but fundamentally part of the same process.
Which leads to a final provocative thought for you, our listener.
Based directly on the UCT framework we've explored today, it's this. If your personal consciousness is, fundamentally, a mechanism that restores coherence and builds symmetry, how does your own deliberate act of focusing attention, of integrating fragmented information, of seeking understanding and connection, how does that consciously directed activity influence the larger coherence field of the world around you?
The theory suggests you're not just a passive observer or even just a user of the world.
It suggests you are an active participant in its living, fundamental coherence, continuously shaping it moment by moment.
Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.